The hall outside the War Council antechamber was the kind of quiet that only existed after the wolves had gone in and closed the door behind them. Wren had learned to read that quiet the way other servants read the weather, by the quality of light through the arrow slits, by the pressure of air against the tapestries, by how long the silence held before the voices began. That morning, the silence held for less than a breath. She had come for the linens, the same as every morning before a tribunal session, when the council wolves required fresh cloth on the long table and clean coverings on the folding chairs the elders used during extended proceedings. It was the kind of task that made a person invisible, which was precisely why Wren had been assigned to it 3 years ago, and precisely why she had never asked to be reassigned. Invisible suited her. Invisible kept her fed and housed, and mostly unmolested in a palace where status was a bladed thing people carried openly. She stopped 2 paces from the door when she heard the voice inside. Not the Alpha King's voice. She would have recognized that one. This voice was lighter, more practiced in its warmth. The voice of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to sound reasonable while wanting unreasonable things. Cale's voice, the king's younger brother, Lord Commander of the Outer Battalion, the man whose portrait hung in 3 separate rooms of the palace because he had paid for all 3 himself. She should have set the linens down and retreated. Every instruction she had received in 3 years of palace service pointed in that direction. She was the counting girl, the linen maid, the one who folded cloth in the small hours and was not looked at directly, except when something was needed and could not otherwise be located. She should have gone back to the linen room and waited. She did not go back. The door was not fully closed. It had been pulled to, in the way a man pulls a door when he is confident no one of consequence is in the corridor. Wren stood still and listened, and what she heard in the next several minutes remade the shape of every morning she had left. Cale spoke to someone he called Sorin. She recognized that name too. Captain of the Outer Gate. A lean and careful man she had seen twice in the kitchens, accepting a meal he had not paid for with the ease of someone accustomed to receiving things without payment. Cale told Sorin that the Solstice Tribunal was their opening, that Aldrich would be occupied with the border grievance petitions through the afternoon and into the evening, and that the sealed dispatch from the northern packs would sit unread until the following morning at the earliest. Sorin's voice came lower, harder to separate from the fire's sound, but she caught the shape of his agreement. 3 border packs, he said, and Cale corrected him gently. 3 border packs given freely in exchange for Herod's recognition of Cale's claim. It was not a trade, Cale said. It was a gift, offered before the gifts were his to give. Herod. Wren stored the name like a coin slipped into a seam. The planning was not spontaneous. She could hear that clearly even through the door. The timing of Sorin closing the outer gate, the exact moment the dispatch would be in transit between the northern courier and the council clerk's office, the names of the 2 pack elders who had already agreed to Cale's terms in private. It was a thing that had been spoken many times in other rooms and was being confirmed here, on this morning, because the Solstice Tribunal was 3 days away and confirmations had to be made. She heard footsteps inside, moving toward the door. She picked up the linens and walked quickly and quietly toward the servant's stair, and she was 14 steps down before her legs began to feel unreliable beneath her. Mira was at the base of the stair, coming up with an empty water pitcher, and the expression she wore when she suspected someone had done something inadvisable. She took one look at Wren's face and reversed direction without a word, following her back into the linen room and closing that door too, this time all the way. "Say it fast," Mira said, "before you talk yourself out of it." Wren said it fast. Mira listened without interrupting, which was unusual. Mira interrupted. It was one of her primary modes of caring for people, the insertion of a sharper thought before the slower one could cause damage. When Wren finished, Mira set the pitcher down on the sorting table and was quiet for a moment that went on too long. "Wren," her voice came carefully, You are a linen maid. I know what I am. You are a linen maid, Mira said again, and the repetition was not cruelty. It was the closest thing to protection Mira knew how to offer. The Lord Commander has 14 years of standing in that council chamber. You have 3 years of standing in this corridor. If you walk into that room and say what you just said to me, they will not ask who trained you or what you heard. They will ask who sent you. And there is no answer to that question that helps you. Wren folded a piece of linen that did not need folding. Her hands wanted something to do. If I say nothing, 3 packs lose their standing to a warlord who has never set foot on their territory. If you say something, you lose yours. Such as it is. Mira was not wrong. That was the difficulty with Mira. She was rarely wrong about the shape of a risk, only occasionally wrong about whether the risk was worth taking, and that was a distinction she and Wren had been navigating for nearly 2 years without resolving it. Wren spent the rest of that day in the linen room and the adjacent storage corridor, carrying out her tasks with the kind of deliberate thoroughness that left no room for thinking. She pressed the winter covers. She counted the ceremonial tablecloths for the 3rd time that week. She carried a bundle of worn hemming to the repair basket and stood in the corridor outside the council hall for longer than the task required, watching the guards change at the far end of the passage, listening to the palace settle into its afternoon sounds. She was still standing there when Elder Voss came through. He was old in the way certain men were old in a pack hierarchy, which meant that age had added weight to what he already had, rather than stripping anything away. Elder Voss carried his bloodline the way other men carried weapons, visibly, and with the expectation that its presence would be noted. He did not look at Wren directly when he passed. He had not looked at her directly in 3 years. He looked slightly over her head, at the wall behind her, and addressed her in the way he addressed furniture that had been placed inconveniently. "The counting girl," he said, to no one in particular, to the junior wolves trailing at his shoulder. "Still counting linens, I suppose, when there are proper matters at hand." The junior wolves did not laugh, but they permitted themselves small adjustments of expression, the kind that constituted agreement without the risk of accountability. Elder Voss moved on. The corridor absorbed his footsteps and was quiet again. Wren stayed where she was until she was quite sure the shape of her face was something she could control, and then she went back to work. The Solstice Tribunal opened on a cold morning, the kind that came in early when the season was done with subtlety. Wren arrived at the council hall before the first elder, before the guards had finished positioning themselves, carrying fresh linens for the dais table and the side tables along the east wall. She had done this 20 times, at least. The hall knew the shape of her, or rather, did not know it, which amounted to the same thing. The council hall was a long room with a ribbed ceiling that made voices carry strangely, so that a whisper near the dais could be heard at the back wall, and a shout near the entrance arrived at the council table already emptied of urgency. The king's chair sat at the head of the dais table on a raised platform of 2 steps, flanked by the council chairs in diminishing order of seniority. Kale's chair was at the immediate right of the king's. It was a large chair, positioned to catch the light from the eastern window. Wren was arranging the cloth on the side table nearest the door when the hall shifted. She felt it before she heard it. A change in the quality of the air, a slight collective adjustment among the junior wolves near the entrance. The Alpha King came in without announcement, which was unusual for a formal tribunal session, and the hall absorbed him the way a deep room absorbs a sound, quickly, completely, with a silence that came after. Aldrich was not a tall man in the way that made other men feel short. He was a large presence in the way that made the room feel smaller, which was different. He moved to the dais without acknowledging the chamber's response to him, and he sat, and the council began filling its chairs around him. Wren should have left. The linens were arranged. Her task was complete. She reached the threshold and stopped, her hand on the doorframe, because something in the room's configuration had changed between the moment she entered and the moment she tried to leave, and she was trying to understand what it was. She knew, 3 seconds later, what it was. Aldrich was looking at her. Not the way people sometimes noticed a servant in an expected location. His attention had a quality that was harder to locate than direction. It was the particular focus of a man who tracked exits and hesitations as a matter of habit, and had registered hers before she fully understood she was hesitating. He did not gesture or speak. He only looked for a moment, and she felt the look the way she sometimes felt the draft from the arrow slits, as a change in temperature that informed her about something happening elsewhere. She took her linens and left. She walked back to the linen room and sat on the sorting stool and thought about 3 packs losing their land. If you are wondering whether she found a reason to go back and speak, the answer arrived before she had quite decided to let it. The council took a recess at midday, and she was sent with refreshment cloths for the anteroom where the elders waited. Aldrich was not with the elders. He was in the corridor outside, alone, reading a folded letter with the focused stillness of someone who read everything as a potential problem. Wren stopped 2 paces from him. He was closer to her in this moment than he had been in 3 years of sharing a palace, and the distance felt entirely different at this range. She thought about Mira's voice. She thought about the weight of the word liar and how easily it attached to certain kinds of people in certain kinds of rooms. She thought about the 2 pack elders who had already agreed to Kale's terms in private, whose agreement would become irreversible once the dispatch was intercepted and the northern border opened. "My lord," she said. He looked up from the letter. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the doorway, without surprise, as though her presence in this corridor had been factored into a calculation he had already made. She told him what she had heard, not quickly, the way she had told Mira, with the words tumbling out ahead of the fear. Slowly, because she knew that what she was saying would only mean anything if the shape of it held together under scrutiny, and so she gave it the shape it had in her memory. The antechamber door, not fully latched. Kale's voice. The name Soren. 3 border packs, and the Solstice Tribunal as the opening. The locked gate. The sealed dispatch sitting in transit between the courier and the council clerk. The name Herod. Aldrich was quiet for a long time after she finished. The letter was still in his hand, folded closed. He looked at her with an attention that was not sympathy, and was not dismissal, and was not quite either of the things she had rehearsed for in the sorting room. She could not tell if he believed her. She could not tell if that was a question he had already moved past. She did not ask. "Return to your station," he said. She went. The recess ended and the tribunal reconvened, and Wren folded things in the linen room until her shoulders hurt, and then she sat on the stool and waited for whatever came next. Mira brought food at the second bell and did not ask questions, which was itself a kind of question. Wren ate without tasting it and watched the lamp. What came next arrived at the third bell, in the form of raised voices from the direction of the council hall. She did not go to the hall. She stayed in the linen room and listened to the sound travel through stone, which carried the shape of anger without the words. Mira came back at the fourth bell with her eyes wider than usual and sat down without preamble. "The Lord Commander," Mira said, "has named you a liar before the council." Wren set down the cloth she had been holding. "In those words?" "In words close enough. He said a palace servant had presented fabricated allegations out of a hunger for standing she could not earn through service. He said the Alpha King was being manipulated by a girl who folded sheets for a living." Mira's voice was controlled in the way that meant she was managing something she might otherwise say too forcefully. "He said it in front of Elder Voss and the full northern delegation." "What did the king do?" "Nothing visible." Mira paused. "He was still." "It is apparently a different kind of still than usual, according to the junior wolf who told me, but I cannot testify to the distinction." Wren thought about the 2 pack elders whose agreement had already been made in private. She thought about the dispatch in transit. She thought about what Kale knew he needed to do before the end of the tribunal session, and what Soren's role in that was, and how quickly a gate could be closed against a piece of paper that only a handful of people were looking for. "The gate?" she said. Mira stared at her. "Soren closes the gate to hold the dispatch. That was the design. If the council is occupied debating whether I fabricated the allegation, no one is watching the outer gate for a messenger." The color in Mira's face did something complicated. "Ren, if you are right, the dispatch is already being held. If you are wrong, you have already been called a liar in front of the full council, and there is no action you can take in the next hour that recovers that." "I know. So what are you proposing to do?" "Nothing," Ren said. "It is not my gate." She meant it plainly, without the resignation that Mira seemed to hear in it. It was not her gate. It was not her corridor, not her council chamber, not her sealed dispatch. She had done the thing she was positioned to do, which was to be in the right place at the right moment, to hear a door not fully closed, and to carry what she heard to the one person with the standing to act on it. Whether Aldrich acted was a question she had transferred to him when she spoke in the corridor. She could not retrieve it. What she had not accounted for was how long the night could be, waiting for a question to answer itself. Mira stayed. She sat on the floor with her back against the opposite wall and slept in the intermittent way of someone who was choosing not to leave rather than choosing to sleep. Ren did not sleep at all. She listened to the palace change its sounds as the night moved through its registers, the guards calling the hours, the distant clatter of the kitchen fires being banked, the particular silence that settled around the third hour past midnight, when even the stone seemed to be resting. She was thinking about the 3 border packs, whose territory she had never seen, and whose people she could not name. She was thinking about the 2 elders whose agreement had been private, and whose choice might be reversed if the evidence reached the council in time. She was thinking about the name Herod, which she had stored like a coin, and which she had spent in a corridor to a man who had told her nothing in return. She was thinking about what it cost to be believed by someone who had every reason to believe his brother instead. The answer came with the dawn bell, not in the linen room, but in the sudden sounds from the outer ward that even stone walls could not entirely absorb. Shouting. Not the general commotion of a gate opening or a courier arriving. Specific voices, one of them carrying the flat cadence of an order being issued. Mira was awake before Ren's feet hit the floor. Neither of them spoke. They went to the servant's window that overlooked the ward. And what Ren saw was this. Soren standing in the middle of the outer yard with his wrists held by 2 of the king's household guard, his face arranged in the expression of a man who had calculated that cooperation was now more useful than resistance. The outer gate stood open. 3 of Aldrich's personal riders were coming through it on horseback, each carrying a sealed document case. Aldrich himself stood at the yard's center. He had not changed from his tribunal clothes, which meant he had not slept either. He was speaking to Soren in a voice too low to carry to the window, but his posture said everything the volume withheld. The sealed dispatch was already in his hand. Mira said something under her breath that Ren did not catch. "He went himself," Ren said. Not a question. "Apparently. Through the postern passage, before Soren could complete whatever arrangement he had made with the gate mechanism." Mira's voice had changed in a way Ren had not heard before. "The king opened his own gate, Ren. He did not send a man. He went himself, in the dark, to retrieve a dispatch that proved his brother intended to sell 3 packs to a warlord, and he did it before anyone in the council knew he had moved." Ren watched Soren being walked toward the eastern holding cells. She watched Aldrich hand the dispatch case to one of his riders and issue an instruction she could not hear. She thought about what it cost a king to go himself, when kings had men specifically so they did not have to go themselves. She thought about what it cost him to open a case that contained proof against his own brother. She thought about the weight of that, how it must have sat in him through the night, and she pressed the thought down before it could become something she didn't know what to do with. If you have been watching from the beginning, you already know what she did not yet let herself know. Consider staying with it a little longer. The tribunal reconvened at the 8th bell. Wren was not summoned. She arranged the linen room with the specific focus of someone who needed their hands to be busy, and she was in the middle of refolding a cloth for the 3rd time when the guard came to the door. He was young, one of the household wolves assigned to the inner corridor, and he wore the expression of someone who had received an instruction they found baffling and was executing it faithfully in spite of that. "The Alpha King requests the presence of the linen maid," he said. Mira looked at Wren. Wren set down the cloth. The council hall was full. Every chair at the dais table was occupied, and the standing witnesses ranged along the wall included every rank of court wolf from the junior officers to the senior delegation from the Northern Territory, the same delegation before whom Kale had named her a liar the evening before. Elder Voss sat 3 chairs from the head of the table with his hands folded on the surface and his face arranged in the elaborate neutrality of a man who knew the architecture of the room had shifted in a direction he had not planned for. Kale was at his chair to the right of the throne. He was looking at her when she came through the door, and his expression was the one that she suspected he had prepared before he arrived, practiced and sure and only slightly tightened around the edges by the events of the morning. Wren walked to the threshold of the dais. She stopped there, because that was the edge of her permission, and she held herself in the particular stillness she had learned 3 years ago in a palace that had not been designed to hold people of her kind with any care. Aldrich looked at her from the king's chair. She met his gaze across the length of the hall and felt the distance between them in every concrete particular: the stone floor, the raised platform, the ranked chairs of men who had not looked at her directly in years. "This council will hear testimony," Aldrich said. His voice in the council hall was a different instrument than the voice she had heard in the corridor. It filled the ribbed ceiling completely, and the echoes organized themselves into something that had no space inside it for interruption. From the woman who heard what others chose not to speak aloud. Kale's composure did not break. He leaned forward slightly, gathering himself for a second attempt. "My lord, with respect, a servant's account of a conversation she claims to have overheard through an improperly closed door is not testimony. It is rumor given a formal occasion. The council cannot seat a linen maid as a witness to affairs of state when no wolf of standing corroborates her account. The sealed dispatch from the Northern Courier corroborates her account," Aldrich said, "in full, including the name of the warlord, including the names of the 2 pack elders who were approached in private, including the terms, which are precisely what she described to me, at midday, 6 hours before the dispatch was retrieved." The hall was very quiet, the particular quality of quiet that only existed in a room where something irreversible was arriving, and everyone present could feel it coming, though not all of them could yet see its shape. Elder Voss's hands on the table surface had tightened, almost imperceptibly. Kale looked at his brother. Something moved behind his face, working through the sequence of calculations available to him, finding each one closed. "You would take the word of a counting girl," he said, "over your own blood." A muscle at the corner of Aldrich's jaw moved. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the chamber's acoustics had to reach for it. "I would take the truth from whatever source carries it. A king who cannot do that is not governing. He is being governed." Kale pushed back from the table. He was still composed, still ordered, still the portrait of a man who had known how to present himself from the time he was old enough to understand that presentation was a kind of power. "Then you have chosen poorly," he said, "and you have done it in front of the Northern delegation, which will have its own interpretation of how the Alpha King weighs his alliances." "The Northern delegation," said the senior Northern elder from his chair along the wall, in a voice that was dry with restrained contempt, "has already heard the terms Kale offered their packs in private. We were among the witnesses approached. We declined, and we came here to determine whether that declination needed to be made formal. He looked at Cale with the expression of a man who had smelled something unpleasant in a confined room. It appears it does. The silence after that was of a different character. The kind that settles when the last exit of a room has been located and found locked. Aldrich rose from the chair. He descended the 2 steps of the dais platform with the deliberate pace of a man who was taking care to do each thing fully, not quickly. He crossed the council hall floor toward the threshold where Wren stood, and every eye in the room followed him. Because when a king moves in a formal session without announcement, the room has no precedent for looking elsewhere. He stopped before her. Up close, she could see that he had not in fact changed from his tribunal clothes, that there was dust on the hem of his coat from the outer ward, that he had retrieved that dispatch case himself and carried it back through the postern passage and sat with it through the remaining hours of the night before the tribunal reconvened. She could see what the night had cost him in the set of his shoulders and the particular patience in his eyes, and she looked at it directly, because she had not yet learned to look away from things that mattered. He extended his right hand, open, palm upward. It was not a gesture the court had protocol for. The court had protocol for everything, for the manner in which a senior wolf approached the throne, for the angle at which a petitioner bowed, for the exact words of acknowledgement when a treaty was sealed. It had no protocol for a king extending his open hand to a linen maid at the threshold of the dais in front of the full council and the northern delegation, because the situation had not previously arisen. Wren looked at his hand. She thought of Mira's voice, of the word "counting girl" spoken to the wall above her head, of the shape of a door not fully closed on a morning that had remade everything since. She placed her hand in his. "This council," Aldrich said, in a voice pitched to carry to every wall of the hall and through them into the passages beyond, recognizes Wren as witness-keeper to the throne. Her testimony is binding. Her standing in this court is the standing of a king's voice. Any officer of this house who addresses her otherwise will answer to me directly. Cale was placed under house confinement before the tribunal's closing bell, his seal as Lord Commander suspended pending the council's full review of the northern correspondence. He left the chamber through the east passage with 2 household wolves at his shoulders and the particular stillness of a man who was recalculating everything from a position he had not expected to occupy. Elder Voss called the closing formalities in a voice that had shed its old authority somewhere between the opening of the dispatch case and the moment the king descended the dais steps, and the words came out technically correct and hollow of their usual weight. The senior northern elder remained after the session to speak privately with Aldrich, and when he left the hall 2 hours later, the terms for the border pact's continued protection had been revised in writing and sealed with the throne's mark. Sorin was formally arrested by the council record at the 7th bell, the gate captain's seal stripped from his office and assigned in interim to a wolf the northern elder himself vouched for. That the outer gate would now be held by someone who answered to something other than Cale's ambition was not a small thing, and everyone present understood it was not small. Mira was waiting in the outer passage when Wren came through, still carrying the same set of folded cloths she had been holding when the guard arrived that morning, because she had not thought to set them down. Mira looked at Wren's face, and then at the hand that was no longer holding the king's, and then at Wren's face again. "Well," Mira said. "Well," Wren agreed. "You are apparently the king's witness-keeper now." "Apparently?" Mira nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who had argued forcefully against a particular course of action and was now in the process of reassessing the quality of their advice. "I have been told that the king's witness-keeper maintains chambers in the East Wing." "I have been told the same." "That is considerably better than the linen room." "The linen room had its qualities," Wren said. "I knew every stairwell." Mira's expression did something that was almost but not quite a smile. "I should tell you then. The guard who came to fetch you this morning, He stopped at the kitchen first. He asked which of the maids was Wren specifically, and when I told him, he described you. He described you correctly, in detail, down to the manner in which you fold, rather than roll the ceremonial cloths. She paused. The guard has not been to the linen room before. Someone gave him that description. Someone who had observed it. Wren was quiet for a moment. When would the king have had occasion to observe how I fold cloth? That, Mira said, is the more interesting question. She was formally named to Wren's household 3 days later, at Wren's request and Aldrich's signature, an arrangement that the court received with the resigned pragmatism of a body that had already processed several more astonishing events in the same week, and had run low on the energy required for objection. The East Wing chambers were larger than anything Wren had previously occupied, and smaller than anything that was usually assigned at a witness keeper's rank, which suited her, because she did not know yet how to inhabit a large space with the ease of someone who expected to be there. She was learning. She started with the window, which faced the outer ward, and she stood at it on the first morning and watched the gate open for the Northern Courier's return rider, carrying confirmation that all 3 border packs had received the throne's revised protection terms and had accepted them. 3 packs. The number sat in her like something that had been held in tension for too long and was finally allowed to settle. The days after a reversal of that magnitude were not quiet days. The council met in extraordinary session twice in the following week to formalize the terms of Cale's confinement and the suspension of his command, and Wren attended both sessions in her new capacity, seated at a secondary table to the dais's left with a writing board and the right to speak. Elder Voss acknowledged her precisely once during the first session, in the formal phrasing the protocols required, his voice carrying the inflectionless quality of a man who was performing a necessary function and nothing more. She accepted the acknowledgement with the same inflection, and they understood each other without the necessity of speaking further. Aldrich did not explain himself to her. That was not how he operated. She had come to understand, across the strange accumulated days of that week, that he was a man who demonstrated his decisions through their consequences rather than through their narration, and that the habit was not coldness. It was something closer to the assumption that people who paid attention would see what mattered, and that people who did not pay attention would not be helped by a description. She paid attention. She noticed, for instance, that the guards assigned to the East Wing corridor had been rotated to include the 2 most senior members of the household watch, an arrangement that had not been in place before her arrival in those chambers. She noticed that the secondary table at the dais's left had been set with the witness keeper's chair facing at a slight angle toward the throne, rather than straight forward, so that the 2 chairs held a corner in common that the rest of the council could not occupy. She noticed that when the session broke for the midday recess on the second day, Aldrich was already in the corridor when she came through the door, not precisely waiting, but present in the way he had been present the first time she spoke to him, as though he had calculated where she would be. "The Northern Elder departs tomorrow," he said. "I know. I have the witness record to complete before he goes." "It can wait until evening." She looked at him. He was not explaining the alternative, which meant the alternative was something she was meant to work out. She worked it out. "You want me at the formal farewell." "I want the court to see you at the formal farewell," he said. And the distinction was the most direct thing he had said to her since the day in the council hall, possibly the most direct thing she had heard him say to anyone. There is a difference between naming a standing and establishing one. The naming was last week. The establishment is ongoing. "I understand." "I know you do," he said. "That is why I said it plainly." She attended the Northern Elder's farewell. She stood in the correct position at the threshold of the Great Hall's south entrance, which was the witness keeper's position, and which she had located from the old ceremonial record Mira had found in the archive room that morning, because Mira had anticipated that she would need it and had not waited to be asked. The northern elder saw her in that position and bowed at the depth required for the king's formal household, and the assembled court saw him do it, and the question of whether her standing was real or provisional was answered in the language the court spoke most fluently, which was the language of witness gesture. She held the position until the elders' party had cleared the hall, and then she let out a breath she had been keeping somewhere below her ribs for most of the morning. In the weeks that followed, the council formalized Kale's situation with the thoroughness of a body that had recognized its own near failure and was compensating through procedural completeness. The border correspondence was entered into the sealed record. The two pack elders who had been approached privately gave their accounts before the council, which corroborated Wren's testimony so precisely that Elder Voss, who had been present for both sessions, did not attempt to raise a procedural objection to either one. Soren's confession, given on the third day of his confinement, confirmed the design of the gate mechanism and the timing, which in turn confirmed what Wren had understood from the corridor, that the scheme had depended entirely on the dispatch remaining unread for long enough to become irretrievable. It had not remained unread. The king had gone himself. She did not see Aldrich alone again for some time after that, not because of awkwardness or formality, but because the work of governing had expanded sharply in the wake of a Lord Commander's removal, and the king was occupied with its edges. She understood this was what governing looked like from the inside, the constant work of filling the spaces left by the things that had failed, and she did not take the absence as information about herself. She took it as the terms of the work, and she did her share of it. The witness keeper's role was not what she had imagined in the abstract moments when she had imagined it at all. It was not ceremonial, not primarily. It was close listening in rooms where people spoke carefully and relying on her to catch what the careful speech was moving around. It was knowing when to write down exactly what was said and when to write down what was meant. It was the accumulated skill of 3 years in corridors, where she had not been looked at directly, which had taught her to hear what was not being said, rather than only what was. She was, it turned out, suited to it. Mira told her this with the brisk satisfaction of someone reporting a fact they had been sitting on for a while. "You have always been suited to it," she said, one evening in the East Wing chambers when the lamp was low and they had both been awake longer than was reasonable. "You were doing this work in the linen room. You were just not being paid for it or protected while you did it." "I was not doing it for pay." "No," Mira said. "That is why it counts." The solstice had passed by the time Aldrich came to the East Wing corridor, not during a session, not for a formal purpose. He came in the early evening, when the palace was between its registers of sound, and he stood outside the door without knocking, in the particular stillness she was beginning to recognize as the pause before he spoke. She opened the door. She had heard his step in the corridor, had recognized it, and had already put down what she was working on before he arrived. "The dispatch riders confirmed this morning," he said. "The 3 packs have declined Herod's renewed approach. They have requested formal treaty inclusion with the throne, ahead of the spring tribunal." She felt the 3 of them settle again, those 3 packs, into something that felt like permanence. "That is a good outcome." "It is the outcome you made possible," he said. "I want that spoken plainly, before it becomes something we do not say, because it is understood." She looked at him for a moment. "You could have sent a rider to tell me that." "I could have," he agreed. He was not uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. He held it the way he held everything, with the stillness of a man who had decided to be where he was and was not second-guessing the decision. "I came because I wanted to ask you something." "Ask?" "The council has no provision for a witness keeper who does not reside in the formal household," he said. "The formal household has chambers that are not the East Wing." He paused. The pause was not theatrical. He was, she understood, being careful with a thing he did not want to damage by being imprecise. "There is a standing the protocols do not fully cover. I am told it requires both parties to choose it in front of the council, and I have not asked you whether you would choose it. I am asking now." She thought about the door not fully latched. She thought about the cloth pressed to her chest and the 14 steps down the servant's stair. She thought about what it had cost him to open his own gate in the dark and to rise in the council hall and say the thing he said in front of every person who had called her the counting girl. She thought about what it cost her to stand at this threshold, which was a different threshold than the one she had flinched at, and she thought about the difference between flinching and choosing. "Yes," she said. He did not say anything further immediately. That, she understood, was not coldness either. It was the particular quality of a man receiving something he had waited for without letting himself know he was waiting, which required a moment to settle fully. His hand, when he extended it, was open, palm upward, the same gesture as the council hall. She placed her hand in his, and the corridor was quiet around them, and the palace held its breath in the way that stone does when something is decided inside it that will take a long time to change. The formal ceremony before the council was brief, and without the theatrical weight of the larger public sessions, because Aldrich had designed it that way, choosing clarity over ceremony and witnesses over spectacle. The council elder who read the standings terms aloud was not Elder Voss, because Elder Voss had asked to be excused from the presiding role, and Aldrich had granted the request without comment, which was its own kind of answer to a question the elder had not quite put into words. Wren stood at the dais threshold as she had before. The hall had the same ribbed ceiling, the same torches, the same quality of light through the eastern window that had caught Cale's chair on the morning of the solstice tribunal. The chairs were occupied by the same council, -1, and the northern delegation had sent a representative specifically to witness this session, which was a thing they had not been asked to do and had chosen to do anyway. She was not the counting girl in this room anymore. She was not the linen maid. She crossed the dais threshold and stood where he stood, and the room received it. Months later, Mira would tell her that the moment she most remembered was not the formal words or the council's acknowledgement or the northern delegate's bow, though all of those had been worth keeping. What Mira most remembered was the way Wren stood, not performing the ease she did not yet fully have, not squared against the hall's weight as though bracing for impact. Standing in the way of someone who had decided that a room was not going to be smaller than she was, and who had arrived at that decision through the specific route of 3 years of invisible work and a door not fully closed, and the willingness to carry a truth to the one person with the standing to act on it. Mira had been standing along the east wall in her named capacity as a member of the Witness Keeper's household, and she had watched the Alpha King's expression at the moment Wren crossed the threshold, and she kept that particular observation to herself, because some things were better received when you noticed them for yourself. In the corridor outside the East Wing, the one that Wren had walked through 3 years ago as no one of consequence, the 2 senior household guards stood their post the way they stood it every evening, which was to say, without fanfare and with great care. The door at the corridor's end was the one she had opened that evening when Aldrich came without announcement, and it would be opened again every evening after, for as long as they could manage. She was standing at the window again, the one that faced the outer ward, watching the gate when she understood what had happened to her. Not as an event, not as a sequence of decisions, but as a settled fact. The ward was quiet, and the gate was open, and 3 packs held their land. She had been the one to carry the truth through the corridor. He had been the one to go himself in the dark, through the postern passage, to make sure the truth had something to land on. That was the shape of it. She let her hand rest on the sill the way it had rested on it that first morning, the same stone, the same window, the same ward beyond it. The difference was not in any of those things. The difference was that she was standing in the right room finally, and the door behind her was the one she had chosen to walk through. Outside, the gate held open,